clearly the companies that respond the quickest are the ones that are going to be most trusted, most liked by their customer base.
Hello, thanks for listening to the Go Beyond Disruption podcast for weekly insights for your business from inside the accounting and finance profession. We give you exclusive perspectives every week that help you stay ahead of the curve, whatever sector you work in. I'm Kyle Hannon. I'm based in the AICPA and CIMA office in the heart of London's financial districts. This week's episode is all about building trust in a digital age. And I'm joined by Allister Manson. He is partner and head of technology at Opus. Allister's a qualified insolvency practitioner. He's also a chartered accountant, and he heads the dedicated technology division for Opus. They're a UK-based national corporate services practice, and they focus on insolvency and restructuring. Allister is currently the only technology specialist IP in the UK. He has over 20 years insolvency and restructuring experience. He supports businesses from startups all the way through to established software, hardware and tech service providers. He's previously worked at PwC as well as KPMG in the Cayman Islands. And he's got tech experiences that comes from 5 years managing and advising fintech companies in Latin America. And he now supports up-and-coming tech businesses. He does that as a mentor at Startup Boot Camp. Allister, where are you joining us from today?
Hi, Kyle. Absolute pleasure to join you today from central London, the Opus offices in Euston, sitting at the top of a tall glass tower.
Yes, I almost feel that I could lean out of our window and wave towards yours. But of course, with the weather at the moment, I think I'd far rather stay in the warm office that I'm in at the moment. And I would imagine you do the same.
Absolutely.
Tell us something about how you got into tech, because you are in quite a unique position here in the UK in the industry. But where did it all start?
Well, I really fell into tech more out of luck than judgment, I have to say. My wife's from Latin America. We decided to have our family down in South America. She's from Uruguay, so we landed in Montevideo. As you very eloquently pointed out, I'm a restructuring professional, have been for many years, but there wasn't a lot of restructuring going on in 2011 when we landed in Uruguay. And a friend of my wife's was setting up a startup, a fintech startup, really trying to connect Latin American consumers with the rest of the world via a payments platform. And he very kindly asked me to join him in that enterprise. And now that enterprise, which is known as AstroPay, is a hugely successful business across multiple territories. And although I haven't been with them for a number of years, I watched their success with great interest. And I also had the pleasure of working with other payment platforms in the region, as well as mentoring and advising tech companies on their way up. I guess you could say I caught the tech bug in the early sort of 2010s. And it's really led me to where I am now.
So what areas of tech did that bring you into contact with? Because you started in the payments space, but as you say, it's a fast changing world, especially when it comes to how we internationalize and globalize transactions and data. What came next for you?
You mentioned online payments, but that covers a whole range of technologies and a whole range of providers. So you might be working with a seller of hardware, a fashion product, an online service, computer games, telecoms. They all need payment services. So I was very, very fortunate to be able to come into contact with some of the most exciting companies in the world. We work with Facebook and Alibaba, GoDaddy and PlayStation, as well as sort of mom and pop shops selling different things online. And we were really connecting Latin American consumers with those businesses around the world and enabling them to do business together.
And when you talk about the specific types of tech, was this a blend of cybersecurity? Was blockchain starting to rear its head? Were you dealing with cyber currencies or crypto? What did that teach you about what tech could be doing?
Well, as you say, because we're an online payments business and we were dealing in multiple sectors and also handling people's money, inevitably that brought us into contact with cyber issues. We were constantly under attack and I needed to learn how to deal with those issues successfully. Fortunately, we did that almost all the time. In addition, back in 2011, 12 and 13, that was really the start of the cryptocurrency boom. Bitcoin had recently been incorporated into the world's financial ecosystem. And we were one of the first processors to accept Bitcoin as a currency before obviously exploded into the mainstream in 2017.
As an avid podcast listener, of course, I help make them too. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're here. But anyone who's been listening to podcasts, especially here in the UK, would have seen quite a lot of attention being paid to an amazing podcast called The Missing Crypto Queen, about a massive cryptocurrency scam. And that has been playing out recently in the early parts of 2020, which is when we're recording this podcast. That case is in the courts. And I hear they're making a TV series all about it. So tech and numbers and perhaps slightly untrustworthy behaviors is very much moving into the global consciousness. It's more than just sitting there in business meetings and in conference rooms. This is something that people are turning into podcasts, into TV shows. And for yourself, as an accountant, someone who does pay attention to numbers, you must really be scratching your head and wondering how trust and technology and all of this need for education as they fuse and blend and do some amazing things. You must be realizing that trust is increasingly important in this digital age. Is it right to be saying that it's more important? Are we living through a crisis of trust?
I think we absolutely are. I think we're experiencing for the first time the greatest crisis in trust in our recent human history. Trusted institutions, the BBC, Facebook, Apple, some of the biggest names in the world are coming under threat. They're coming under attack from people who don't trust them anymore. The BBC, they've introduced a fact-checking service because so many people have doubted the output that they've provided. Apple recently were in court and were fined for deliberately slowing down their operating system. It seems to persuade people to move away from their older phones and buy newer models. And when you've got the most trusted institutions and brands in the world coming under threat, I think that causes us a huge problem. Who do we trust? And in an age of digital innovation with huge disruption, new technologies coming on stream all the time, I think that's led to a greater erosion of trust. And I'd really say that comes from four main things. There's been a huge increase in the speed of change, and nobody wants to feel that they've been left behind. So they are very keen to incorporate the latest technologies, apps, and hardware, but they don't always, who has time to read the T's and C's? What do we really know about what we're signing up to? We all want to be early adopters, but the speed of change is eroding our ability to know exactly who we're contracting with and what we're giving away.
And I think that is so important at the moment because in the last year, when the flood of website and app messages that suddenly started popping up in front of us every time we went to a site or used a new app, there'd be this cookie message that would pop up. Hey, is it right? We're going to use cookies. You agree to, and you don't read it. You just go, yeah, accept. I just want to get on with what I was there to try and do. And we don't really think enough about what that simple accept might in fact be implying. And we just want to get on with other stuff. And perhaps in this high-speed world, that is something which we really need to look at again. And that just shows you it's a conversation for more than just business people, more than just accountants, because, finance professionals live in the world of numbers and trust and technology. But the average person out there is also part of this conversation, because if you're not trusted by the wider community, by society, by your industry, by regulators, because of course regulation and statutory compliance is becoming more and more important, that is starting to really affect everyone. So when we talk about building trust in a digital era, in a digital world, who would this conversation really be for?
I don't think anyone can escape this, the situation that we're in. We're all faced with a huge volume of data, and we all need to, whether it's in our personal or our business lives, we need to differentiate between the trusted actors and the less trustable actors. In our personal lives, we're bombarded by multiple news sources, and we need to understand and be able to differentiate between the truth and the so-called fake news. the scale at which new technologies are being brought on stream often brings unintended consequences with them. As we know, almost all of us now have access to online banking. We do our banking through apps. But before banking went online, it was virtually unheard of for our bank accounts to be hacked into. To think that anyone would have actually been able to get into our account and move our money around for us or against us, that's a huge area of threat and of trust erosion that's come about through technology.
And in some ways, what the equivalent would be to make it look as though we have gone into the bank and stolen from our own accounts, with phishing and cyber fraud and identity masking. It really is so difficult to figure out how one can build trust in new services, new offers, new innovation. And that's something which I'm sure has been on your mind in your work at startupbootcamp.com, as well as with so many of these other startups in the tech world that you've been working with. I mean, if you've got no track record, you don't have a foundation, you don't have a history, because of course you're an innovator, you're a disruptor as a company, you're a startup, you don't have a precedent. So how do you build a reassuring reputation? How do you build trust if actually you're just offering a service or a technology that's brand new? You've got nothing to build that on, have you?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the key to it is twofold, really. The effectiveness of your product and service has to be absolute. You have to give people what you say you're going to give them. But not only that, we all know that things go wrong from time to time. So having a strong customer service platform, being responsive and listening to your customers so that you create a constant feedback loop between the product or service that you're offering and the consumers that you're offering it to is absolutely critical. You're not going to incorporate every suggested enhancement that consumers come up with for your product, but if you're listening to them and if you're hearing the same thing multiple times about a problem or an enhancement or an improvement that you could make, then clearly the companies that respond the quickest are the ones that are going to be most trusted, most liked by their customer base.
And then you have to back it up by delivering. That's the important thing, because on the one hand, you've got someone who seems trustworthy, but of course, delivering is the other half of the equation. You've got to balance the two, and I think we'll be talking about balance a little later. The technology market is certainly seeing lots of innovation, but not all ideas prosper. That's an unfortunate truth. I mean, no one has a crystal ball. So from your perspective, how would you say an innovative company, let's say a startup, can provide a reassuring and stabilizing platform when success isn't yet guaranteed?
I would say that there are multiple ways that startups can accelerate their growth in a trustable way by bringing in technologies from outside their own team, perhaps. There's an awful lot of open source technology out there. That's technology that's open and available to everyone. It's been tested by the community, if you like. And in some senses, that makes it more trustable than something that's developed in-house. Leveraging that can be a great way to accelerate your growth and build trust in your product.
All right. Now, it says, and I know this to be true because it's there on your profile, that you are the only technology specialist IP in the UK. People who don't know what an IP is in that context, and I'll just repeat the sentence again, the only technology specialist IP in the UK. What is that? What do you actually do?
When I came back to the UK, I felt that there was an underrepresentation in the restructuring, in the advice given to companies that are in trouble, financial difficulty, in the technology sector. That the professionals working in restructuring are fantastic at what they do, but they don't specialize in tech. And tech is quite a specialist field of expertise. And I really felt that I could add a layer of assistance to that sector, having come from it. That's really the idea behind it.
So when we talk about IP in this context, what we're actually saying is we all know what IT stands for, information technology. Most people, when they hear IP, they think that stands for intellectual property. But in your context, it means you're an insolvency practitioner. Is that the case?
That's exactly right. And some people have called me the IP for IP, which I must admit is a bit too corny to put on any business card.
So that's why I just think that in the context of our conversations today, if we talk about IP, it is actually shorthand for insolvency practitioner rather than intellectual property. Right, we'll continue our conversation shortly. We'll find out more about best practices for when the worst can happen, either to you or to your clients. All of that is coming up in this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. It's brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find out more about this podcast and about the rest of our wider project at gobeyonddisruption.com. We're also moving towards episode 100. We're recording that in mid-March 2020. And of course, if you are listening to this podcast and you would like to have a chat to me to tell us which country you're listening from, why you listen, what topics and trends interest you, join us. Just send us an email. You'll see information about how to do that in the show notes to this episode. We'd like to have a quick conversation with you, perhaps use it in episode 100. We're very much looking forward to that. I am talking to Allister Manson. He is taking us up to very close to that 100th conversation. We focus about how technology is changing the profession, as well as how we as professionals are rising to the challenges. How do we identify opportunities and use our human intelligence to stay ahead of the curve? Our guest has plenty of that, the human intelligence. He is Allister Manson from Opus. We're talking about building trust in a digital world. Allister, there is no such thing as a risk-free guarantee. We know that. We hear about hacks, about cyber fraud and digital scams all the time. So what happens when the worst happens?
It's a good question, Kyle. I mean, one of the biggest cases that I'm working on at the moment is the insolvency of a cryptocurrency exchange. One of the new growing exchanges that have sprung up around the world, based in the UK, found itself getting hacked. Ultimately, that turned out to be by organized and serious crime. And when new technologies come under threat like that, it causes trust issues throughout the entire industry. And this is no different. The exchange itself is called Qubits, and they were effectively attacked in a very sophisticated manner over a period of over a year, culminating in one large sting, in inverted commas, if you'd like, that resulted in them losing a significant proportion of their assets and ultimately resulting in the company having to go into administration. So the criminals are becoming more and more sophisticated, and new technologies need to be alive to not only disrupting and creating new and better ways of doing things, but also protecting their consumers at the same time and basically being as mature as their predecessors. We often find that founders and founder boards in tech companies tend to be relatively young, and a few grey hairs wouldn't go amiss in terms of putting in place systems, controls, and checks to protect their client base.
And I think the protection is an important thing. You can have your heart in the right place, but unless your cyber shields are in the right place as well, you're literally never sure what the next hour will bring. What I'd like to do is go back to the very basics when we're talking about things like trust. I know we've talked about it in some detail, but let's take it down to what trust is in a nutshell. Perhaps in one sentence, what would you say trust is?
Well, Carl, the dictionary definition of trust is a firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. I think that works very well in the accounting profession. But the reality of trust is that it is more than just a dictionary definition. It's a real thing. It's a fluid and ongoing relationship between parties. It can be there one day and be very, very easily lost the next day. So it requires constant nurturing and constant attention. In addition, it's not something that you can necessarily grow organically. A lot of companies, particularly after a problem, talk about rebuilding trust. But rebuilding trust is something of a misnomer. I mean, trust is something that is given to you by third parties. It's not something that you can build organically necessarily. So it's really about establishing that connection with your client base, with the general public, and nurturing and growing it every day.
And accounting and finance professionals work with numbers every day, don't they? They also work with people. And sometimes, especially for insolvency practitioners, someone like you who's a chartered accountant as well, that situation's going to get difficult. Those numbers can cause difficulties, and that can cause difficult, stressful conversations with people. So my question is, how does an accountant or an auditor maintain the trust of a client in those situations? Because after all, you're really just trying to do the best for everyone involved, aren't you? So how do you make this clear, even though things are getting difficult?
I think this is a huge opportunity for the accounting and auditing profession, to be honest. I think it's an opportunity in two senses. Firstly, I think there needs to be an expansion of the work that we're doing. I don't think looking at the numbers is enough anymore. I think we need to be looking behind the numbers at the code and looking at the underlying data and making sure that there is integrity within the code, and there aren't leaks either of code, of information, or of cash out of a business that nobody's aware of. That's a huge opportunity. But in terms of building trust between ourselves as professionals and our clients, I think in a more and more digitalized world, we need to turn to really our ethical principles, as well as our technical expertise and our experience, emotional intelligence, and reassuring the client about the sincerity of what we're trying to achieve and transparency of what we're trying to achieve, as well as reassuring other stakeholders about the truth and the reliability of what we are producing for clients or auditing at clients is absolutely key to establishing trust in a digitalized, ever increasingly digitalized world.
I love the focus on balance. There's so many different things to maintain in equilibrium. And that balance is something I'd like to talk to a bit more, because you've got data leaks. We've spoken about financial hacks. How do we retain the trust of our clients, our profession, and the wider public in the wake of these difficult headlines? When you see stories in a podcast or on television, when you see these high-profile headlines that make us think, this is just difficult. It's not impossible, is it? I mean, how do we retain the trust of everyone? How do we keep everything balanced?
I think it's a really relevant issue. I think we've seen high-profile cases where leading accountancy firms have been associated with situations where trust has been completely eroded. High-profile collapses, but also leaks of data, such as the Panama Papers. And again, it comes back to our ethical framework. And I think we need to consider that at every step on the path. It's a difficult balance, establishing trust with your client, but also trust with the wider stakeholders that you may be representing, the client shareholders, the general public, investors, or creditors. And that's one of the skills we all need to bring to the profession. Fortunately, it's one of the skills that most of us are brought up with. Although we're seeing a huge amount of innovation within our profession, we're seeing new tools and platforms that help us to do our work and maybe take some of the drudgery out of it. I still think the human skills that we bring and the emotional intelligence that we bring to relationships will always provide us with a role in dealing with clients and their accounting, their data, and their other information.
Absolutely. And it's worth bearing in mind that every time you see a headline or news of some investigation that's discovered something that went off kilter, we're only seeing those because in the end someone ended up doing things correctly. That's why it was discovered. And I think that is definitely something which provides reassurance. Now, our typical listener likes to keep ahead of the curve. So you were talking about the future of the profession, what lies ahead. From your perspective, what's the next disruption you see coming in this context of trust and the digital age we live in and work in?
I genuinely think that aside from all the major technological advances that have been signposted over the past sort of 12 to 24 months, things like 5G, the increase in AI-driven technology, I think more fundamentally, I think we're going to be moving from, and I think there's going to be a huge value in moving from our traditional standards of, if I can use an example, Google and YouTube, towards a valued service like a Troogle or a TrueTube, where you have verified data, where you have fact-checked data, fact-checked images and videos. And there are companies out there that are already getting ahead of the game, so that they are providing information that has been checked by multiple third parties. So in the old days, well, even now, I guess people are using Snopes and the BBC's fact-checking service. But there are companies out there, there are startups like Cerelay that will actually look at videos of news taken in real time and provide multiple third-party verification optionality so that we can be much more secure about the veracity of what we're seeing, what we're reading.
Well, you've certainly pointed us at some interesting places to go online, and seeing you're in the signposting mindset, I'm not going to stop you there. If people would like to find out more about the topic, perhaps about you in particular, where can they find you online or in real life?
I've been on a bit of a mission to educate my profession, the restructuring profession, about advances in the digital world. And I'm hosting a fintech conference in March of 2020. So that would be a good opportunity. But I guess the best way is just to keep an eye on my LinkedIn profile and see what's coming up.
And we'll have links to that in the show notes. Now, before you go, what should accounting and finance professionals take away from our conversation about trust in a digital age? What's the one thing you think they should be doing next that will help them go beyond disruption?
I think they should be talking to their clients and looking at other ways in which they can build trust between their clients and their ultimate stakeholders, perhaps beyond the financial, looking at the data, the code, and the other messaging that's going out, and making sure that the whole package is trustable and verifiable.
Thank you, Allister. A great place to end the conversation today. There is plenty more to explore about the topic, and our show notes have links to all of the resources that we've mentioned. To view them, just click on the episode's info icon in the podcast app on your smartphone or tablet, or open the episode in your computer's web browser. You'll find everything right there. There are also two other websites we'd recommend for listeners interested in taking this further. They are cgmastore.com/GoBeyondDisruption and AICPAstore.com/GoBeyondDisruption. You'll find courses, webinars, and other professional development resources that will help you keep ahead of the curve. Some free, some paid for, but go and have a look and see what you think. Thanks again to our guest, and of course, thank you for listening to this podcast. If you've enjoyed it, tell a friend or a colleague, share it online, or even email us. Tell us your feedback. You can find that link in our show notes, because we'd love to know what you'd like to hear more of in the podcast. From our office in the heart of the financial district in the City of London, I'm Kyle Hannon. We'll be back soon with more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Till next time, goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at aicpa-cima.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered, and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to, and assume no responsibility for, the content or application of the material contained herein, and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.